Right now, on a summer Saturday in Dubrovnik, around 1,500 tourists are queuing to pay 35 euros each to walk the walls of the old town. Cruise ships have emptied another 3,000 day visitors into a city built for 50,000 people. 90 minutes away by road in Prizren, Kosovo, a medieval fortress sits above a perfectly preserved Ottoman old town, with no queue, no entry fee, and a full day's cost, accommodation, dinner, and sightseeing of around 35 euros total. The same number. One is the entry fee, the other is the entire day. That gap is what this list is about. The famous European destinations are not necessarily the best European destinations. In several cases, they are demonstrably worse. They are simply better marketed. Every entry here has been UNESCO listed or designated a European capital of culture, verified by historical significance that matches or exceeds whatever you are currently paying a premium to see. The towns do not lack quality, they lack advertising budgets. One of them is where James Joyce wrote Ulysses. One contains 1,500 conical limestone houses built specifically to avoid taxation. One is the literal birthplace of the written Slavic language. None of them will charge you 35 euros to look at their walls. Number 1. Prizren, Kosovo. Prizren is the kind of old town that travel media would have made famous by now if Kosovo had a larger tourism board budget. It sits in the south of the country at the foot of the Shar Mountains, population around 80,000. With a cobblestone old town threaded by the Bistrica River, a 16th century Ottoman mosque on the waterbank, and the Kalaja fortress above it all. The call to prayer echoes across the water in the evening. The minarets and church domes share the same skyline. The city has been continuously inhabited since the 6th century. Full meal at a local restaurant is around 6 euros. Guest house room in the old town is 20 to 40 euros a night. Coffee is 1 euro. Entry to the fortress is free. The daily budget including everything is around 35 euros. Kosovo is not in the Schengen area, so check your visa requirements before going, and entry rules vary by passport. English is widely spoken among younger residents. The infrastructure is less developed than Western Europe. A traveler who posted about Prizren online put it plainly. The fortress, the Ottoman old town, the river running through it all. Dinner for 6 euros. I have told everyone I know to go there. That is the recurring pattern with every town on this list. People who find them by accident become evangelical about them because nothing prepared them for how good they actually are. Picture the cobblestones at dusk, the Bistrica audible from every street, no other tourist visible in any direction. You are paying 35 euros for the entire day. In Dubrovnik, you would not have made it past the ticket booth. Would you spend 35 euros on the walls of a famous town or 35 euros on everything in an unknown one? Number 2. Gjirokastra, Albania. Gjirokastra is a UNESCO World Heritage City, where the locals call it the Silver City, and when you see it from above, you understand immediately why. Every house in the old quarter is roofed in the same gray stone slate, creating a uniform shimmer across the hillside that exists nowhere else in Europe. The castle above the town is one of the largest in the Balkans. In the castle courtyard, sitting in the open air like a piece of industrial sculpture from the wrong century, is a captured American U-2 spy plane. It has been there since 1957. The castle is medieval. The spy plane is Soviet era. The combination does not exist anywhere else on Earth. A full traditional meal costs 5 to 10 euros. A guest house room in the Ottoman quarter costs 20 to 45 euros, including breakfast at most places. Castle entry is 2 euros. Coffee costs 1 euro. A full day budget is around 40 to 65 euros. Albania's roads are still developing, and journey times can be longer than distances suggest. A UNESCO designation from 2005 confirms what any visitor will see immediately. This is not a hidden gem in the cheap sense. It is hidden in the invisible sense. A guesthouse owner in the old quarter described the pattern without apparent frustration, because it happens constantly. Visitors arrive planning 1 night and extend to 3. They come for the castle, the stone rooftops, the absence of crowds. They say they do not understand why nobody told them about this place. The answer is that Albania had minimal international tourism coverage until around 2018, and its reputation has not yet caught up to its reality. Gjirokastra is also the birthplace of Albania's communist dictator Enver Hoxha, whose former family home is now an ethnographic museum, and of Nobel Prize-nominated author Ismail Kadare, whose novels are available in translation and worth reading before you go. The town has layers of history that are not packaged neatly for visitors. That is part of what makes it work. Picture the gray rooftops spreading down the hillside below the castle in the midday light, the Drino River Valley stretching south toward the Greek border, and the mountains visible in every direction. The courtyard of the castle is enormous and almost always quiet. Then there is the spy plane. It is exactly as incongruous as it sounds, and twice as interesting. A comparable hilltop medieval city in Spain draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Gjirokastra draws a fraction of that. The quality differential is not in the city's favor to the visitor. The Albanian version is arguably more interesting. The differential is entirely in the marketing. Next, we go further into Albania for a city that wears its past on the outside of every building. Number 3. Berat, Albania. Berat earns its local name within seconds of seeing it from across the Osum River. The city of 1,000 windows, rows of identical large white-framed windows on the Ottoman houses stacked up the hillside below the castle, each row above the previous, creates a visual pattern so specific and so distinctive that no photograph fully conveys the effect. The houses have been maintained in this form for centuries. The name is accurate, and it is not hyperbole. A 13th century Byzantine castle sits above the quarter. The National Iconographic Museum inside the castle contains one of the largest collections of Byzantine icons in the Balkans. The town has been inhabited since the 4th century BC. A full Albanian meal costs 5 to 10 euros. A guest house in the Ottoman quarter costs 25 to 55 euros. Castle entry is 3 euros. A full-day budget is 40 to 70 euros. Berat and Gjirokastra share a UNESCO designation, confirmed in 2008. Road connections to Tirana are around 2 hours by bus. Ohrid carries credentials that most people have never been told about. The lake beside the town is 3 million years old and contains over 200 endemic species found nowhere else on Earth. UNESCO gave Ohrid a dual World Heritage designation in 1980, covering both the natural lake and the historic city, one of the rarest categories of recognition in the entire system. In 886 AD, Clement of Ohrid completed the Cyrillic script in its final form here and established the first Slavic university. The town is, in documented historical terms, the birthplace of the written Slavic language. Local tradition claims 365 churches, one for each day of the year. That is probably an exaggeration in the literal sense. It is not an exaggeration in terms of what the old town actually looks like. The Church of St. John at Canio, a 13th century Byzantine building on a cliff directly above the lake, is one of the most beautiful individual sites in Europe. The lake below it is so clear and so intensely blue that first-time visitors consistently describe it as looking digitally enhanced. A full meal, including local Ohrid trout, costs 5 to 12 euros. A hotel in the old town runs 25 to 55 euros a night. A typical daily budget is 45 to 80 euros. North Macedonia uses its own currency, not the euro. A boat operator on the lake who has spoken with thousands of international visitors described his genuine puzzlement with a straightforwardness that is hard to dispute. A 3-million-year-old lake, Byzantine churches on cliffs above the water, a medieval old town. He finds it strange that this combination is not better known. There is nowhere else like this in Europe. He is correct. Santorini receives millions of visitors annually for a flooded volcanic caldera. Ohrid has everything Santorini has, plus a university founded in the 9th century. The visitor counts are not comparable. Number 5. Nafplio, Greece. The first capital of independent Greece is unknown to most international visitors. Nafplio served as the Greek capital from 1823 to 1834, during which the neoclassical mansions and public buildings that defined the old town were constructed. It sits on the Peloponnese Peninsula facing the Argolic Gulf, with a Venetian fortress above the town, a medieval island fortress called Bortzi in the harbor, and beaches of genuine quality within a 10-minute walk. From Nafplio you can reach Mycenae in 1 hour, Epidaurus in 45 minutes, and Argos in 20 minutes. That makes it a practical base for visiting 4 major ancient sites, while staying in a town that is more beautiful and more historically significant than many of the places that draw visitors to Greece. A nightly hotel in the Old Town costs around 80 euros in peak season. Palamidi Fortress entry is 8 euros. A full Greek meal costs 10 to 20 euros. A daily budget runs 80 to 150 euros. Buses from Athens run approximately every hour, and the journey takes around 2.5 hours. Nafplio is more expensive than the Balkan towns on this list because Greece has a higher cost base. The comparison is not with Albania. The comparison is with Santorini, where the average peak season room costs over 400 euros a night for a view of a volcanic caldera. A restaurant owner in Nafplio's Old Town described the situation without bitterness, just clarity. People spend a week on Santorini and never consider the Peloponnese. Better beaches, better history, better food. Rooms for 80 euros instead of 400. But nobody is paying to tell them that. The Greek Tourism Board's promotional priorities are directed toward the islands because that is where international demand already exists, so demand keeps being directed there regardless of quality comparisons. Palamidi Fortress requires climbing 999 steps, which is either a feature or a deterrent depending on who you ask. The views from the top across the Argolic Gulf are worth it. The boats to Bortzi run from the harbor for around 5 euros return. The island fortress sits in the harbor at an angle that makes it look like it is performing. Picture standing at the top of Palamidi, looking down at the old town spread below, with the harbor and the island fortress beyond, and knowing you are standing above the city that first housed the government of modern Greece. Most visitors to Greece have never heard of this place. Most visitors to Greece are currently paying 400 euros a night to look at a caldera from a terrace. Both things are simultaneously true and they are related. Would you pay 5 times more for a view that is objectively less interesting, or would you rather know about this? In the 1950s, the Italian Prime Minister described Matera as a national disgrace and forcibly relocated approximately 15,000 residents out of its cave dwellings into new housing on the plateau above. In 1993, UNESCO declared those same caves outstanding universal value to humanity. In 2019, Matera served as European Capital of Culture. The caves did not change between these 3 assessments. The framing changed. Matera is now one of the most distinctive cities in Italy, which tells you something useful about the distance between official narrative and actual reality. The Sassi di Matera are cave dwellings carved into a ravine in the Basilicata Plateau, inhabited continuously for an estimated 9,000 years. That is a number that requires a moment. 9,000 years. Before the pyramids were built. Before the Bronze Age. The same specific ravine in southern Italy has been occupied by human beings across the entire span of recorded history and several millennia before it. The cave churches inside the Sassi contain frescoes dating to the 10th and 11th centuries. The ravine itself is the color of the surrounding plateau, pale honey stone that turns gold at dusk and gray-white at noon, because the cave dwellings and the cliff they are carved into are the same material. A cave hotel room in the Sassi costs 70 to 130 euros a night, which sounds high until you understand that sleeping in a cave that has housed human beings for 9,000 years is a genuinely different experience from sleeping in a hotel room. Day visitors pay nothing to walk the Sassi. Cave church entry costs 3 to 5 euros each, or around 10 euros for a combined ticket. A typical daily budget is 90 to 150 euros. Matera is not on the main Italian rail network. The nearest hub is Bari, about 65 kilometers away, with buses and taxis running approximately 1 hour to Matera. A cave hotel owner described the consistent reaction of guests on their first morning. People come expecting a curiosity and find something that rearranges their understanding of how old European civilization actually is. 9,000 years of continuous habitation. Nothing in Northern Europe can say that. She is right on both counts. Carlo Levi, writing in 1945 about the Basilicata region, described it as a place where Christ never came. The Italian government agreed enough to empty it out a decade later. UNESCO reversed that verdict 40 years after that. The caves were there through all of it. Matera is more visited than it was before 2019. It is still dramatically less visited than Rome, Florence, or Venice. A traveler who posted about their visit described it as the moment they understood what 9,000 years of continuous habitation actually looks like when you are standing inside it. Nothing in Rome or Florence had prepared them for that. The difference between 9,000 years and 2,000 years is 7,000 years, and standing in the Sassi, it does not feel abstract. If you have made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. It is completely free, and we bring new videos about our country. Dubrovnik implemented tourist visitor caps because 1.5 million visitors each year were damaging a city built for 50,000. The Croatian government's response did not prominently include telling tourists about Trogir, a UNESCO World Heritage City of equivalent historical significance located 27 kilometers from Split Airport. And Split Airport is actually closer to Trogir than it is to Split. Trogir has been continuously inhabited since the 3rd century BC. Its Cathedral of St. Lawrence contains the portal of Master Radovan, carved in 1240, and described by UNESCO as the finest example of Romanesque sculpture on the eastern Adriatic coast. There is no entry fee to walk the historic island, and there is no queue for the portal. Old Town hotel prices run from 50 to 100 euros a night. A full Dalmatian meal with local wine costs 10 to 20 euros. Camerlengo Fortress costs 3 to 4 euros. The daily budget ranges from 70 to 120 euros. Buses from Split run every 30 minutes, and the journey takes about 40 minutes. Croatia has used the euro since 2023. Number 8. Piran, Slovenia. Venice administered Piran directly for 500 years. When the Republic of Venice collapsed following Napoleon's conquest in 1797, the Venetian Gothic architecture, the campanile proportioned identically to a Venetian original, the harbor geometry, the piazza, the narrow alleys, all of it transferred to Habsburg ownership and then to successive administrations without being substantially altered. What you are looking at in Piran is not Venice-inspired. It is Venetian. The distinction matters because Piran costs roughly 1/5 of Venice to visit and has a fraction of the tourist traffic. Hotel in the historic center, 60 to 100 euros in season. A full Adriatic fish meal, 10 to 20 euros. Campanile entry, about 2 euros. Daily budget, 80 to 130 euros. The historic center is car-free. Buses from Ljubljana take about 2.5 hours. Trieste in Italy is 30 minutes by car. A waterfront restaurant owner in Piran who has worked there for over 20 years described the reaction without being able to explain the underlying cause. Most of his foreign guests tell him Piran is the best town they visited in Europe and ask why nobody told them about it. He does not have a satisfying answer. It has been here for 800 years. That is the nature of this list. The information gap is not recent. These towns did not suddenly become good. They were always this good. The marketing infrastructure that should have connected them to travelers simply never materialized in the same way it did for Venice, which has a tourism board, a film festival, and about a century's head start in international brand recognition. Picture Piran's waterfront at 7 a.m. before the day visitors arrive. The Adriatic light on the orange and yellow facades. The campanile, the silence. The smell of salt water and espresso. That town has been there looking exactly like that for the better part of a millennium. There is a painting by Van Dyck in Sibiu. There is a Titian. There is a Rubens. They are in the Brukenthal National Museum, one of the oldest public art museums in Europe, opened in 1817, located on the grand square of a medieval Transylvanian city that was founded by Saxon settlers in the 12th century, and that was named European Capital of Culture in 2007 by the European Commission based on rigorous cultural significance criteria. Most international travelers have not heard of Sibiu. In Prague, a hotel room in the historic center costs around 180 euros a night. In Sibiu, the same category of accommodation costs around 45 euros. The medieval preservation is comparable. The art museum in Sibiu is better. Old Town hotel prices range from 40 to 80 euros a night. A traditional Transylvanian meal costs 8 to 15 euros. Brukenthal Museum entry is 12 euros. Coffee is around €1.50. Daily budget is 55 to 100 euros. Sibiu International Airport connects to several European cities including London, Munich, and Vienna. Bucharest is approximately 3 hours by train. Romania uses the LAU, not the euro. Sibiu's old town is built around 3 interconnected squares, Piața Mare, Piața Mică, and Piața Huet, surrounded by Gothic, Baroque, and Renaissance buildings that have survived intact to a degree that is genuinely remarkable given what happened in Romania across the 20th century. The dormer windows of many buildings have a specific eyebrow-shaped opening that gives the facades an unnerving quality, as if the buildings are watching the street. This is not a retrospective description. Locals call this the City of Eyes, and once you notice it, you cannot stop noticing it. A museum curator at the Brukenthal described the pattern that defines how most international visitors find Sibiu. They include it in a broader Romanian itinerary. They tell her afterward that it was the unexpected highlight. They had not read about it in advance. They found it by accident. That is how most people find Sibiu. The irony is that Sibiu is not hiding. It held a Van Dyck and a Titian in a public museum for 2 centuries before most of its current visitors were born. The information infrastructure simply did not route people here. The Christmas market in Sibiu is consistently ranked among the best in Europe. The Astra Open-Air Ethnographic Museum outside the city is one of the finest outdoor museums on the continent. The surrounding Transylvanian countryside is dotted with fortified Saxon churches, some of which are UNESCO listed, reachable within an hour's drive. Sibiu is not a day trip destination. It is a week. One traveler posted a direct comparison that requires no editorial interpretation. Medieval walls, Van Dyck on the wall, 45 euros for the hotel. In Prague, nothing comparable, 180 euros, worse room. James Joyce lived in Trieste for 11 years starting in 1904. He taught English, learned Italian, became close friends with local novelist Italo Svevo, and wrote Dubliners, a portrait of the artist as a young man and much of Ulysses while living in the city. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote the Duino Elegies at a castle just outside Trieste in 1912. Italo Svevo published Zeno's Conscience, one of the great novels of European modernism, here in 1923. This is arguably the highest concentration of literary output per square kilometer of any city of its size in 20th century Europe. Most international visitors to Trieste do not know any of this. Most international visitors to Dublin, who come partly for the Joyce connection, do not know that Joyce wrote more of his major work in Trieste than in Dublin. Central Hotel, 70 to 130 euros a night. A full meal in the city's Central European culinary tradition, 12 to 22 euros. Miramar Castle entry, 10 euros. Coffee standing at the bar of a historic cafe, approximately €1.10. Daily budget, 90 to 160 euros. Trains from Venice take about 2 hours. Trains from Ljubljana take about 2.5 hours. Trieste is not Italian in the conventional sense. It was part of the Habsburg Empire until 1918, disputed between Italy and Yugoslavia until 1954, and it sits at the far northeast corner of Italy beside the Slovenian border, which means its cultural identity is Central European rather than Mediterranean. The coffee culture reflects this. Trieste considers itself the world capital of coffee, having served as the main coffee port of the Habsburg Empire for centuries. A coffee ordered as a capo in B, espresso in a glass with a little cold milk, standing at the bar of Cafe San Marco, which opened in 1914, costs about €1.10 and is genuinely among the best coffees available in Europe. The Trulli of Alberobello were built without mortar deliberately, so they could be dismantled quickly to avoid taxation by the Kingdom of Naples. This tax avoidance architecture of the 18th century is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Rione Monti district contains 1,500 Trulli, conical dry stone houses with corbelled limestone roofs, descending a hillside in the Valle di Tria of Puglia, with no modern buildings visible from the center of the district. Nothing else looks like this anywhere in the world. Sleeping inside a Trullo costs 70 to 130 euros a night, and it is the entire point of the visit. A full Puglian meal with orecchiette and local wine is 10 to 18 euros. Daily budget, 85 to 150 euros. Trains from Bari take about 90 minutes. A Trullo owner described the first morning reaction of guests with precision. The photographs do not communicate what it is like to be inside the stone cone in the dark before dawn. Guests on their first morning are always surprised, not in the way they expected to be surprised. Visby, Sweden. UNESCO called Visby the best preserved medieval city in Northern Europe. The city walls are 3.5 kilometers long and almost entirely intact, with 44 defensive towers still standing. Within those walls are the ruins of 11 medieval churches that were never rebuilt after falling into disuse in the late medieval period. 11 Gothic stone skeletons, roofless, standing in the streets of a living Swedish city. Their arches open to the sky, their walls covered in grass and wildflowers. This does not exist anywhere else in Northern Europe. York in England makes a comparable general claim. York's walls are considerably less complete and contain no roofless medieval church ruins standing in the streets. Central hotel prices range from 80 to 160 euros in season, reflecting Scandinavian pricing. Meals cost 15 to 25 euros. A typical daily budget is 100 to 180 euros. Visby is more expensive than the Balkan and Southern European entries on this list. The value proposition here is quality of experience relative to Stockholm, not absolute cheapness. The fast ferry from the Swedish mainland takes about 3 hours. Flights from Stockholm-Bromma take 35 minutes. Medieval Week in Visby, held in August, is one of the largest medieval festivals in Europe. Rocamadour is built vertical up a cliff face. The village has 3 distinct levels: the valley floor, the medieval village and sanctuary carved into the cliff, and the fortress and chateau at the top of the plateau. They are connected by the Grand Escalier, a pilgrimage staircase of 216 steps, worn smooth by 8 centuries of feet. The view from the valley floor of the complete structure, all 3 levels stacked above each other against the pale limestone cliff, is one of the most dramatic visual experiences in France. Mont Saint-Michel draws over 3 million visitors each year. Rocamadour is architecturally more unusual in some respects, built vertically rather than concentrically, and it receives a fraction of that traffic. Hotels in the medieval village cost 70 to 120 euros. A full Quercy meal with duck and walnut costs 12 to 22 euros. Chateau entry costs about 5 euros. A daily budget ranges from 90 to 150 euros. A car is essentially necessary, as public transport connections are limited. The Black Madonna in the Chapelle Notre Dame is small and dark with age. It was the original object of pilgrimage for medieval travelers who walked from across France and Spain. The staircase of 216 steps above it is not a tourist feature. It is a pilgrimage route that has been in continuous use for 8 centuries. The steps are worn because millions of people climbed them before you. Rocamadour has a permanent population of approximately 630 people who live at the base of a cliff that medieval France considered sacred enough to walk hundreds of miles to reach. In 1938, Monsanto was officially voted the most Portuguese village in Portugal and awarded a ceremonial key that is still displayed in the village today. What the competition was recognizing is a village built literally inside and among granite boulders the size of houses. The main street of Monsanto is flanked by boulders that serve as walls, ceilings, and foundations. The medieval castle at the summit sits within a boulder field. The chapel of São Miguel is built inside a granite cavity. The village is not constructed near interesting geology. It is constructed within it. Sintra in Portugal receives over 5 million visitors annually to a romantic hilltop landscape. Monsanto is more genuinely extraordinary, architecturally and geologically unlike anything else in Europe, and is essentially unknown to international visitors. Guest house room, 50 to 90 euros. Traditional Portuguese meal, 8 to 15 euros. The village itself has no entry fee. Daily budget, 60 to 100 euros. A car is necessary. Drive from Lisbon takes about 2.5 to 3 hours. A shopkeeper on the main street described the pattern without embellishment. Visitors arrive having heard Monsanto is pretty. They leave describing it as the most perfect village they have ever seen. The experience of walking the boulder-threaded streets within intact medieval walls consistently exceeds expectations. She added that standing at the entrance to the village, people often stop moving because they cannot immediately understand what they are looking at. That is a specific and accurate description of a place that does not map onto anything in the viewer's existing visual reference. Number 15. Óbidos, Portugal Medieval Wedding Town. Óbidos has been the wedding town since 1228. In that year, King Afonso II gave the town to his queen as a wedding gift, and the tradition of Portuguese kings giving obidos to their queens continued for 7 centuries. The entire medieval walled town has been preserved because of those 7 centuries of royal ownership and the care that came with it. The main street is lined with whitewashed houses decorated with azulejo tiles and cascading bougainvillea. The castle at the end of the street has been converted into a pousada, a state-run historic hotel. Ginginha, the local cherry liqueur, is served in edible chocolate cups at small shops throughout the town for about €1.50. Hotel within the walls, 70 to 120 euros. A Portuguese meal, 12 to 20 euros. The town walls are free to walk. Daily budget, 85 to 140 euros. Trains from Lisbon take about 1 hour. The medieval market in July and the chocolate festival in February are worth timing a visit around. These 15 towns span 12 countries, 9 centuries of documented UNESCO quality heritage, and a price range from 35 euros a day in Kosovo to around 180 euros in Sweden. What they share is the same absence, a marketing infrastructure that would have made them as familiar as Dubrovnik or Santorini. Tourism boards for smaller countries cannot compete with the promotional machinery of the famous destinations. Guidebook publishers cover what sells. Travel platforms favor high-volume destinations. The information you receive about where to travel in Europe is shaped by commercial incentives that have nothing to do with quality. The Croatian government implemented visitor caps in Dubrovnik because the town is being damaged by its own fame. Venice introduced a day visitor fee. The Acropolis now requires time tickets. The system that created those problems is the same system that has been directing you toward those destinations while these 15 towns sat largely empty. If you have been to any of them or know a comparable place that belongs on a list like this, leave a comment. Subscribe for the follow-up. The road trip connecting Prizren, Gjirokastra, Berat, and Ohrid in a single drive through 3 UNESCO World Heritage cities that will cost almost nothing and show you a version of Europe the standard itinerary has never heard of.